Ah, the Christmas holidays. It's the most wonderful time of the year. It's the time when we go back home and visit our family and friends and slowly remember why we left in the first place. Maybe you're like me and some of your conservative family members kind of start coming out of the woodwork on the holidays. And you realize that you moved away because you kind of needed some space in order to grow. And rather than avoiding contentious topics like religion and politics, your family actually talks about the state of the world during the holidays. Or maybe your family tries to not really talk about it, but your cousin or your uncle or your parent can't seem to help themselves from saying that sexist or kind of racist or definitely queerphobic, maybe xenophobic thing that they saw on Fox News. I mean, we've all been there, right? This is what we're going to discuss in today's episode: how to survive a conservative family Christmas. From those awkward dinner conversations to conflicting beliefs, we are going to help you navigate these situations so that you can look forward, or at least maybe not dread, visiting your family in the future. Thanks for joining us. Greetings and welcome to the Progressive Christians podcast. We are the love your neighbor kind of Christians and not the kind who deport veterans and lie about it during a congressional hearing where they are caught in the lie and have to look at the combat veteran in the face on Zoom. No, we're not that kind. So if you're curious about what a socially and politically progressive Christianity looks like, this is the podcast for you. My name is Reverend Dr. Christopher Carter, and I'm your host. I'm a professor of theology and the lead pastor of the Loft Faith Community in Los Angeles, California. Today, I'm joined by...
This is Rev Blair.
And it's Julia.
Yes, just me and two very beautiful, but also very intelligent women. I have to say both. I can't just say one because I want to make sure I don't get in trouble.
Smart and pretty.
There you
Look
go.
at us.
Look at y'all. Look at y'all. Look at y'all. And clearly you have more. I know I bring that up in part as a segue to get into why people even think Kristi and Noem got her job, because apparently people in that world think she's attractive.
She's not smart or pretty. Make it make sense.
Well, some people, Julia, that's she's definitely not smart. I will not say anything about anybody's looks. That's me. I know you will, which is why I know you.
Which is why I'm not a pastor.
But if you haven't seen it, we have a link in the show notes, and you can find the YouTube footage. It is wild.
It was so bad.
She set up. I mean, the guy that's interviewing her from this House committee just sets her up so good. He's like, "We love veterans, right?" And she's like, "Yes." He's like, we would never deport veterans. No, we would not. And he's like, "Talk to this veteran you deported."
I have on Zoom from South Korea this veteran, this Purple Heart winning veteran who was injured in service to this country, whom you kicked out.
Yeah, he self-deported to South Korea, but it was after he got he got some documentation that said he needed to leave the country.
Self-deport.
Yeah. And so he, rather than going to jail, he just left the country.
Because he could have ended up in El Salvador.
Yeah, exactly. He had some minor drug offenses that he actually, and he had not harmed anybody, but he had PTSD. Like, he was in combat. And if you know anybody that's actually been in combat, especially in the 80s, man, there's not any kind of infrastructure in place to help people process what they're going through. So, as I said, today we're going to talk about how do you go home for the holidays or go home for Christmas, and how to talk to and be in conversations with some conservative family members, maybe even MAGA family members. But before we move on to that, we want to start by I really kind of talking about, I guess it's a good way to move towards this conversation. We had a great conversation a few weeks ago with Ben Stringer, and we've been putting up a lot of social media clips that have gotten a lot of feedback on them. We recently put up one where Pastor and lawyer Ben is talking about how basically church doesn't need to be confined to the building, that really church can be anywhere throughout in the world doing services, can be what it means to practice Christianity and do the ministry. And somebody commented on the social media clip by saying, "Oh, that's just coping, so you don't have to go to church." Our producer Spencer, who manages our social media now, to save me from the rejection sensitivity dysphoria that I have when I start doing that stuff.
Thank you, Spencer.
Man, Spencer, big shouts. So responds by saying, hey, no, this is not what it is. These are pastors that are like, trying to talk about the ways in which we need to think about church beyond just the four walls of the building. And the person responds by saying, that's a woman pastor. Can you show me in the Bible or early church history where women were bishops or pastors? And it's just like so frustrating. And now I want to see the Florida Blair, because this is something that Blair deals with, and it is
all
so
the
time.
Dumb.
Yeah.
It doesn't even faze me anymore, because there's a comment on every single video that I post on the internet that's like, oh, she said she's a woman pastor, therefore anything else that comes out of her mouth I'm going to disqualify. And I have had this happen in real life. Like, was with parishioners wearing a collar, and somebody said, what are you wearing? And I said, oh, it's a clerical collar because I'm a minister. And they're like, but women can't be pastors, so why are you wearing a costume? Like, I don't know. It's just part of being a lady pastor. Like, we get trolls in real life. We get trolls on the internet.
I love the point you make that the reason people do it is so they can dismiss what you say. That's first and foremost. That's the reason why. The reason it's such a flawed argument and why they want to point to the New Testament is because obviously there's a history in the Hebrew Bible of women leadership, but there's also history in the New Testament of women leadership. Before we develop all these very particular and specific kinds of roles and titles, women were in leadership that we absolutely know of within the early church. And we also, what many people do not know, is among the reasons why we don't have women who are ordained pastors or priests, as they were trying to figure this out. Because again, we grew out of the Jewish tradition. So there were not women rabbis, but this was a new thing that was emerging because they're trying to consolidate with and make it this religion get adopted by Rome. Women could not be priests within a Roman tradition, like within their religious traditions. And so in order to take this religion seriously, all the women who had leadership roles within the early church before it becomes the Roman church were summarily said, you can no longer have the authority that you once had, because there were many women who had many leadership positions in many churches all across that part of the country, all of the world at that time. There's so much evidence on this. There's so much written about it already. You can look at Tertullian. You can look at like any of these early church fathers that write about this. And so if you come at Blair and you say something that is like, all you got to do is just Google it. Just Google it and get past the first page of Google early church fathers, women pastors, and you will find it. You will figure it out. Stop being dumb. I see the floor.
Also, what I don't understand, because if you're saying it should be how it was in the beginning, like, is that the point? Everything was better the first time. Like, I don't understand the point.
It truly is just a dog whistle, right?
It
like,
is.
It's like a bullhorn. And it's the same
people who would say, like, when Christopher Carter says, well, I have a doctorate in theology, they would say, well, that's because you were a DEI admit, right? Like, they're just going to find any reason to delegitimize
haters,
what we're saying.
Haters.
Yeah. And that's they are, and I think I shouldn't say, as I even said, I was like, I don't want to tell anybody they're being dumb. What I do want to say is you're not doing the research that you ought to do, that you have access to do through the technology we have today. And so
I'll say it.
Well, I know. See, that's what you're on here for. I shouldn't say it. It frustrates me because like it's so disrespectful, and I think even if you don't agree with someone theologically, which is kind of the point we want to get into today, there's a way to not be disrespectful. And it's just the disrespect that people give Blair on social media, they give women on social media, and then to call themselves Christian. It makes me so frustrated because I'm like, you just don't see Jesus doing this. Because and if your Christianity is not reflected in the practices of Jesus, then you need to ask yourself, are you practicing Christianity? Again, so this could be something that your conservative family member said. You're like, hey, I joined this new church. My pastor's name is Reverend Blair. And they're like, lady pastor? So what do you do? How do you love these people? Julia, you had an interesting question that I wanted you to ask as we were kind of framing. Well, I mean, it's an important question as we were kind of framing out the episode.
I understand that it's family, and in theory, you should love your family. I also should say my family, we only had one cousin who didn't agree, and she can't come to holidays anymore. But other than that, we all are of accord when it comes to politics. But insofar as not family, former high school people that you knew. I don't even want to say friends. Your second cousin's wife, your second cousin's boyfriend, your brother's baby mama, like whatever, whomever. Why should we intend to love these people? The MAGA ones I'm referring to. Not, I mean, like, obviously you should love your, but like, you know, like, but why is it important for us to find the love of Christ for everybody, even the ones that are ignorant and disrespectful, intentionally to be hurtful?
And I think that's it's a it's a great question. And I think it's an important question, in part for me to say. I want to preface this whole conversation by saying, you know, you don't have to sit down and allow yourself to be dehumanized and be put in a place where your own right to exist is questioned. I know, Julia, you had found a Baldwin quote that was referencing at this, and you can look that up and read it here in a moment, because I thought that was really the point. No one, like, we're not saying you need to do that, and so that's definitely not it. And if you need to protect yourself from in the holidays and spend holidays with found family, then I think that's something you should do. But if broadly speaking, if you have family and friends that aren't of the variety where they are going to just be dehumanizing towards you, so you can tolerate being around them. The reason, and one of the pictures or one of the statements we have around the church in the loft, is it reads, "We must learn how to love our enemies because we can become what we hate." And I heard a version of this quote by a pastor and activist, Alan Story, who was in my trip to South Africa. He was the lead pastor of the Central Methodist Mission in Cape Town, South Africa. And his work in dealing with apartheid and resisting apartheid was centered in the fact that if they didn't do the work to learn how to love them, then they too could create an apartheid like mindset in how they engage the other, right? So that's why we learn how to love our enemies, because if we don't love our enemies, we use the same logic, the myth of redemptive violence, basically, to justify our hatred of them. And that's just, we can't go that far. And I know, but I know you have the Baldwin quote that I think is helpful, so people know they don't actually,
from Jimmy, who we love. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist. I think that's a fair boundary. That feels reasonable.
That feels like a good, healthy boundary to have. So that's kind of the basic framework we want to give as kind of a preface to the episode. Protect yourself, protect your health and your mental health and your safety. But for those of you who have family that you still feel like you want to be around, and again, like I said, I fit into this. I have family. Politically, we're all for the most part in the same accord, but theologically, we are definitely not. And we talk about these things. And so, Blair, I know you had found a book that you thought could help, and that we're going to use to kind of frame how we're having this conversation in a way that I thought could be really helpful for some of our listeners, and maybe not for all of our listeners. And I'll let you say more about that.
So a book that's been recommended to me a bunch of times, and I finally got to read it, is Taming Leviathan, Loving Your Christian Nationalist Neighbor by Caleb Campbell. And Campbell is a pastor at the Desert Springs Bible Church in Arizona. And I don't know him personally, have not talked with him, but I have a feeling there are probably a lot of things we would theologically disagree on. But the book is really well written, and basically he experienced in Arizona, through the rise of Trumpism and Christian nationalism, just a lot of his parishioners and folks around him were falling for this Christian nationalist rhetoric, and it was breaking relationships. And so he dove deeply into, how do we heal this? How do we combat this? How do we fix this? The thesis of his book is that rather than avoiding or trying to fight with people we disagree with, that we should approach Christian nationalists or people we disagree with as a mission field. And so this is where I would say this is not a book that everybody should pick up if you have some like evangelical, ex-evangelical baggage. It is a missiological text, and he uses very classic missiological language, evangelical mission language. Missiological is like the theology of mission, and mission is kind of the movement of the church as the church spreads or shifts and changes throughout the world.
Thank you.
And so missiology would be like the theology of that. What do we think is driving that from a divine perspective? I am a missiologist. That's my training. And so I understood exactly what he was saying, and I drive with it, and I went ahead and read it so that if you maybe have baggage that lets you not encounter those texts, we'll just give you the highlights. What he argues is that we should approach Christian nationalists as a mission field, as people to be converted. Now, that's problematic language around that. We're just going to like set that on a shelf for another episode, another day.
Another time. Set on a shelf another time.
But if we imagine the best of missionaries, what they're trying to do is help people experience the love of God. That's what missionaries are ultimately trying to do. And most frequently, we do that. Think of people who are missionaries are people who do that across cultural lines, like from one culture into another, trying to have a cross-cultural conversation about what it means to follow God. And so Campbell says we should approach Christian nationalists like we are missionaries to them. And the first thing missionaries try to do is understand culture, the culture that they're entering into, to try to understand the cultural practices and the deep stories that form the people that they are entering into relationship with. And then as they learn those deep stories and those cultural practices and the values, then to seek gospel-centered transformation within that people group. And so that would be like a sort of calling towards what we would say is like the liberating love of Christ. And so what things in those cultures or in those deep stories don't align with God's liberating love? And then how do we draw people towards letting go of things that are inconsistent with God's grace and moving towards God's life-giving love? He does this like really deeply. He goes to like the Turning Point USA Pastors Conference. He has lots of conversations and interviews with people who are Christian nationalist pastors. He like really, really does behind enemy lines, if you will, to deeply try to understand what is forming the Christian nationalist movement so that he can start to unpack how we could, quote unquote, save them from themselves.
I mean, I really appreciate the work because I think for me it's very reflective of like so much of the work that I've done with respect to anti-racism and anti-oppression work in general has been me going into places where I am the only Black person or the only person of color or the only person there that thinks that I have the right to exist and be there, even in academic spaces, and doing the work to try. I mean, it is a conversion. I'm trying to convert these people, and it's hard. It takes a certain kind of belief in the truth that people at their core, I believe, are grounded in compassion, that people at their core are creating an image of God. There's something that you have to see in them that is potential, and you're trying to help them to rediscover that groundedness that we believe, that spark of the divinity that's in there. And I think this actually brings me back to the conversation that we had with the professor at Boston University, Blair,
Becky Copeland.
Becky, yeah, where she talks about like we had a great conversation around like, you know, the problem of evil and like how like some of the tensions we have is like sometimes you don't want the good thing to happen to the bad person because you want them to be held accountable in some way, shape, or form. And we have to actually have that belief in God's grace, that grace abounds for all of us. And so there's a part of me that I really have so much respect for someone who's willing to do that because I can't. Like there was a gentleman that approached me yesterday during worship service about some work he's doing with police. And he was inviting me to participate. And I was just like, man, I'm not. And we even have police that come to our church that I really like. I'm just like, I'm not there yet. I could talk to someone who's probably a white supremacist before I could talk to a cop. Like, I'm not gonna lie. Cause like, cause I've had.
Well,
anyway, go ahead, Julie.
Well, I was just going to say, not that this man isn't doing good work. That's not what I'm saying. But there's.
It's not.
It's not. But there is a stark difference between him going into these spaces looking the way that he looks.
That's fair.
And you going into these spaces looking the way that you look. He can be undercover, if you will. You, my friend, cannot. So he's going to experience less resistance and less hostility from the jump than any of us would.
I think I think this is one of the books I know I've mentioned on this podcast before, Arlene Geronimus in her book Weathering. And it's framed, the idea for her book talks about women of color and the high maternal mortality rate. And basically the ways in which being Black and being a woman in America wears you down, such that if you try to have a child in your 30s, how much harder it is on your body, because of the stress of just being Black and being a woman. And so I know you're right, Julia. Thank you for saying that and acknowledging. I really appreciate that. And Blair, I want to toss to you, but one thing I want to say is you mentioned before, he talked about not acknowledging, kind of crafting a third way, not neither fight nor flight, but going a third. And I think that's reminiscent. This is, to me, that is following after the tradition of Jesus. You know, Jesus, when he's not trying to integrate in the ways in which you see the Sadducees doing it within his religious tradition. He's not trying to be like the Zealots, even though that's honestly his community. Like Jesus, he grew up around a lot of Zealots. Like, they aren't trying to overthrow the government. He's trying to do, nonviolent resistance, like a third way. And so I love that kind of framing. And so that, to me, this book already has some appeal, and I'm looking forward to engaging it myself.
Yeah. And I think the fact that he is a white man doing this work with white men is really important. And it's not work that all of us can do. But I do appreciate the deep research he includes in the book. And then the second half of the book is like a framework for how to have these conversations after he's done this over and over and over and over again with his parishioners and people in his community, his best advice on how to have these specific conversations around Christian nationalism. And so I pulled out some pieces from that I think are applicable when we're thinking about going to our families of origin, because as we were saying, Pastor Campbell fits in with conservative white men. There is an assumption that if we are returning to our family of origin, that is a place that we implicitly belong. Yeah. Right. So that's not going to be true for everyone. I know, especially for my queer siblings, that sometimes that breaks familial bonds so deeply. If you're continuing to listen to this podcast, it's probably because you are headed home to some kind of home, into a sense of kinship, no matter how strained that may be. And so I do think that the process he puts forward of not necessarily speaking to people who are completely culturally different from you, but that you are actually speaking to people for whom you share a deep story, or at least share a common history. And so then how do you mend or speak across differences when you're starting from that place of commonality? So I think that's helpful.
Oh, but can you say a bit more about the pyramid of communication that kind of like he lays out? And then, that might be a helpful way for us to then get to kind of the actual how to have the conversation.
Yeah. So in his chapter where he starts laying out how to have these kinds of conversations, he talks about the pyramid of communication, which is the sort of layers of the kinds of conversations we have with people. And that at the most surface level, we talk in cliches. How's the weather? Did you see that news report? Right. Like, go Bears, like whatever, like these like just basic things that you don't have to have in common with another person. So that's like the layer of cliche. Then you might have conversations that are surrounded around facts. And this is where I think a lot of people get stuck in these combative conversation is someone says something that's factually incorrect and you feel it is your responsibility to correct that fact, but that fact is actually grounded in a deeper story. And when we can't agree on facts, it's harder to get into the deeper layers of why people are willing to believe things that are incorrect or not factually accurate.
But Blair, all the immigrants that have gotten removed, they're all convicted felons. They're all felons, right? That's a fact. I'm sorry.
I mean, that's what's hard about this, right? Is like, we want to combat facts because that should be simple. Like, it should not be so emotionally bombastic when you correct information. But we know that the part of the deep story that we're combating is alternative facts or fake news, right? So you have to get past facts in order to actually reach transformation. Then he talks about the next layer is opinions. So like the fact that something is fake news, that's an opinion, right? If I were to say all immigrants, or someone else was to say all immigrants are convicted felons, and I would say that's not a true fact. And then they would say, my opinion is there are alternative facts. And this is where then he probes us to go even deeper into the layer of feelings and of needs. And so we'll talk about how you get down into feelings and needs, but ultimately transformation for people, usually doesn't happen at the level of facts. Sometimes it does, right? Sometimes talking about fact checking is all that's necessary. But when we're talking about like deeply entrenched beliefs that are leading people towards dehumanizing behavior, you are probably going to need to get down into feelings and needs before you start to see anything crack.
That resonates so much with, again, my experience of working in anti-racism, but also the ways in which I think in my other work in environmental justice and how you're able to kind of break through this race class binary that can kind of come up, particularly if you're in the American South, because you see the ways in which these things are intertwined. And it gets to the deeper story of the ways in which corporations have just literally stolen these people's land now. Like, now even the white farmers are suffering. And what's not funny, but kind of funny is the Black Farmers Associations are now helping out so many white farmers figure out how to survive this time of increased tariffs because as they'll say, they've never had access
We've
to
been
loans.
new.
We've been doing this. We've been doing, and it's like it's so classic. This makes me frustrated. I want to go off on a tangent, but like when people are like, "Oh, the myth of like the prowling Black person or the evil or angry Black person," I'm like, man, I feel like Black Americans are, given how much we done been through, we are so nice. We are nice to white people. I'm like, given all the stuff that white folks they continually do, we just be like, you know what? I'm gonna give you one more chance. I'm gonna give you one more chance, and like I feel like this happens over and over.
And look at us now.
and, and I think farming for me is such a perfect example. I'm like we were literally stolen, brought here because we could actually grow food. If you look at this, is a big part of the reason why y'all took the money, took the credit, and then now when you need the kind of ingenuity that Black and Indigenous communities have around how to survive this economy, they turn to us. Even though when Biden tried to give like reparations basically to Black farmers, white farmers sued and said, "Oh, that's unfair to give them for some." We can agree that they were discriminated against, but that would be discrimination against us to pay them back. But again, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. But I'm like, this is like the thing that it gets me because this is like again the facts, feelings, opinion stuff. Where like there's a way that I've seen it, as you said, like the deeper story is with that we've all been hoodwinked. That's the deeper story. I'm like, we've all been hoodwinked.
But how? But does it change their minds? Like, do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
The correction of facts. Is that what you're asking?
No.
That when I get to these conversations with these white farmers,
when you get into feelings and you get into need, it seems as though their eyes can be opened, but that doesn't necessarily change their minds. They're just like, oh, okay, well, this benefits me more.
It also takes like trust and time. Because what you get down to in feelings and needs, especially related to Christian nationalism, racism, sexism, homophobia, all of it, usually the driving feeling or the driving feeling is fear and the driving need is safety.
Yep.
And if you can provide a space of safety.
Of what? Like, what is the fear?
The fear is a fear of being irrelevant, a fear of being displaced, a fear of losing your livelihood.
This is why people are transphobic?
Well,
yes.
I do think so. Now I want to pause because this is what I want to have in the second part of the conversation, the podcast.
I'm jumping your show
notes a little bit, but no, it's okay because I do think. I mean, Julie, you're asking the same questions that I think so many people are asking. Like you're asking the questions that people that listen to this podcast that are like walking their dog or like yelling. They're like, "Yes, get him, Julia."
What do you mean?
Like, what do you mean? Like, yeah,
but my job. So
yeah. So I get it. I see you. I hear you. We are going there. All right, we're going to take a break. And coming up after the break, we'll get more into the actual nuances of how to have the conversation, like some of the structure, some of the flow. And then we're going to go through like a sample conversation that you might have around some of the, like what Christmas is and why we even celebrate it. So we'll be right back after the break. Thanks for listening to the Progressive Christians podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, we would love you to please like and subscribe to us. If you are listening on Apple or Spotify, please rate and subscribe. And on Spotify, definitely leave a comment. We would love to engage with you there. We will be having a Q&A episode here in a few weeks. So if you have any questions that you'd love for us to answer, we want to hear from you. It could be deep theological questions or just maybe questions about our background and a bit more about us. Feel free to email us at progressivechristians@theloftla.org. We are also excited to announce that we will be creating some subscriber exclusive content beginning in February. We have some ideas for content. Julia, this is one that emerges from our conversation with you, like reviews on film and TV. That's something that you want us to do, which we're excited about. We have ideas, basically, but we really want to hear from you. What kind of resources would you like us to create? Like, what kind of things would you be willing to pay for? Right now, we're thinking around $5 a month as kind of a baseline. We're hopefully going to have something where people can just give a one-time donation just to support us. But we would love to be able to create content and give you something for that support that could just help you live your life better, be a better pastor, answer more questions, maybe just make you laugh a little bit more, whatever you think you might need. Again, we would love to hear from you. Please email us again at progressivechristians@theloftla.org and let us know. Welcome back to the Progressive Christians podcast. So, Blair, in the book, they have a kind of a little bit about the process of how we might have this conversation. So I'm hoping you can kind of maybe guide us through that. And you add some points that we can begin to unpack throughout the conversation as well around how we actually might begin to change some of these people's minds, or even if they're open to it. But Blair, I'll toss it over to you first.
Yeah. So Pastor Campbell in Taming Leviathan talks about a framework for conversation, for helping people get from just conversation about cliches, which is sometimes where the problematic thing happens, right? Is like an offhanded comment. Because even if you have a family that doesn't talk about deep stuff, people repeat offhanded stuff all the time, right? Like, you can't even say Merry Christmas anymore, right? That's a cliche comment that's coming from culture. And that actually is an opening and an opportunity to have deeper conversations. And so
Zorad Mamdani is going to make all of New York Muslim.
Right. Or how can you be a lady pastor? Women can't be pastors. Like, that's a cliche comment, right? Like, that's not coming from a place of deep understanding. It's coming from repeating something you heard somebody else say. And that is so often where these sort of like aggressive comments reveal themselves. And so Pastor Campbell recommends, very similar to what we talked about last episode in how do we talk to folks who are not supportive of trans and queer folks, this similar process that you start with hospitality, creating a safe space, like showing yourself to be someone who's seeking understanding and not looking for a fight. So start with hospitality, lead with questions. So when someone says something problematic, don't immediately argue with them, but instead ask them, where does that come from? What makes you think that? Why did you say that? What did you mean by that? And then seek to connect on shared values. And also, I really appreciated, he gives this very particular point of avoiding red flags and embracing shibboleths. So red flags meaning like, don't use progressive dog whistles or things are used as dog whistles in conservative spaces to immediately activate someone's emotional reaction. So like, be aware of the kinds of words you're trying to use, or like how I was talking about, right, missiology, and I'm using very particular words to talk about the work of mission in the world, because I know that is like a very heavy topic for some people, and it has caused a lot of harm in the world. And so I'm trying to use language that's different than what folks might associate with that topic. And then embracing shibboleths comes from a story in Judges where the Israelites are trying to figure out who's in and who's out in this battle. And they ask this captured soldier to pronounce shibboleth because it was like a difficult word to pronounce. And if you could say it right, then they would know that you were part of the community. And so it's kind of like, can you show that you speak the same language as me? Like, you have some understanding of where my culture or what my perspective is. And so finding ways to acknowledge that you do actually have some understanding about the conversation from the perspective of the person sitting across from you.
I think this is helpful, especially when you're talking about, I mean, it's obvious, it's translation. You know, like so much of it is how can I speak in a way? I mean, we black folks, like Julie just made it fit. Like we've been like we've been having to do this forever. Like code switching
Code
is what we call
switching.
it. I'm like, this is you got to figure out how to navigate the space. And so, now I'm getting to the pre-production meeting that I was having with our producer, but we talked about the ways in which certain communities who are particularly black communities, like we've always lived it with this particular kind of within an oppressive framework in America. And so if you are black and queer, for instance, like you may not feel like you're necessarily losing access to something because there's always been this reality with which things were denied to you. But if you're white and then you decide that, there's this loss, this psychological loss, right? That could be different. And so you haven't had to do the work of code switching. So for me, I hear this, I'm just like, oh, well, that's just like, I've always had to know how I can talk in certain spaces and know how I can't talk in other spaces. And it's just navigating that dynamic. I think the tricky part for me, and Julia, this is what I was going to ask you, is like, what frustrates me is like when words get stolen. Like I'm still mad about woke, and like like when things get
Ugh.
hijacked from the culture. So then like we have to be careful about using words that we created. Like
Because
you
now it
know,
means something else.
yeah,
But I also think yeah, that's like particularly triggering for me. Like if I hear someone be like, that's woke, I get angry. So that's not usually a conversation I can engage in always civilly, I guess you would say. But there are a lot of them. For me, there's like just this long list, but we flip it over every, what do you think, 10 months? Every 8 to 10 months, there's a new one, right? Because you have CRT, which then was
yeah.
DEI. Like there's always like a new thing that no one has ever heard of because it's not from their culture. So they don't know the definition of it. And then they can say that the definition is a different thing and just change the meaning and ruin everything.
Or even the fact that people don't understand the distinction between gender and sex, and even the conversation we were having last week around how these things are constructed.
People don't know
It's
what anything means.
yeah, and now we are going to do an episode later on this
On
week,
literacy,
what that we need to because that is something we have talked about multiple times. About you talk about we don't read, but honestly, the episode we're gonna do on AI is gonna be helpful on ramp to this conversation, like how we have access to things that is making us even dumber. And I say that like as a professor who's like, no, this is actually doing harm when you lose your capacity to think critically.
to
And I think
think, period.
to think and so Blair, I want to get to the like kind of example conversation you have laid out as a way to engage in the questions Julie was asking about, is it possible for transformation, like when we get to the part of feelings and needs and below opinions. But so we kind of laid out a example conversation if you're talking about the meaning of Christmas. So Blair, again, I'll toss it over to you and kind of like think through how this might go, and we can kind of go back and forth a little bit.
Yeah, so we tried to think of an example that was not quite as emotionally charged, maybe for our listeners, as a homophobic or sexist or a racist comment, because we want you to practice
Exactly.
You're
something that
welcome.
doesn't activate your nervous system, so that when someone says something that does activate your nervous system, you've thought through how you conduct yourself. So we thought about, what if somebody says, you can't even say Merry Christmas anymore, right? Because we know that underlying that is a lot of deep stories and a lot of not factual information. So how would you...
Lies.
Right. So how would we take that comment, that singular comment, you can't even say Merry Christmas anymore, and probe to get beyond the cliche, past the facts, down into those deep feelings and those needs? Because when you get down to those deep feelings and needs, that's where we said transformation can start to occur. And so when we're in a Christmas setting or holiday setting, the hospitality is kind of already built in, right? This is like a warm, cozy, fuzzy space. Like that's where we're already expecting that we are gathered together. Ideally, nobody's going to pick up and storm away. We all have good intent towards each other. So the hospitality is built in. And so if someone says something like, you can't even say Merry Christmas anymore, you can lead with questions. Oh, that's really interesting. why do you think it's important that people celebrate Christmas or say Merry Christmas in public settings? And wait and see what they say.
I think that's such a great question about why do you think it's important for him to say it. I just when you wrote that, I was like, oh, that's so good because I think like so my family, these kind of conversations are happening. It's so funny. My family's so strange because like everybody's so religious, but like we are a family of people who we are. Let's just say we are not. We have had a hard time surviving prohibition. I'll just say that. Like, we are a family. We are a family where there's many a cocktail.
Libations flow.
Libations are flowing, and so like usually after like, especially like maybe not before the food
Around 3 p.m.
Yeah, maybe a little later than that, but not too much later. That's when I do think there's a way in which it like literally just relaxes people enough to say something like that. I'm just like, that's ridiculous, and that's what I would think. And so your question and being like, why is it important to you? I think really gets to that. It's a way to get to the feelings. Like, why does it matter to you if someone says this or not? And it makes them also do some reflective work. And they might say something like, well, we're in America and America's a Christian nation or something like that. You'd be like, well, why does that matter to you? Like, what kind of nation this country is? Like, well, why does it matter to you that's, and force them, not even force is the right word. I think invite them to maybe do some internal work that they otherwise haven't done, which I think can be really helpful for them and for you. Yeah, exactly.
Call them out.
Look at you, Julia.
Look at me. Because I would have said, you just said it. That would be my response. You can't say it. You just said it. Is the Lord going to strike you down?
I mean, if you want to be more pointed, you can ask like, oh, did you have an experience where someone told you can't say Merry Christmas? Right? Like, is that actually your experience? Or are you parroting something else you've heard?
Wow, that'd be good too. That's really, yeah. I mean,
because if you had an experience where somebody scolded you for saying Merry Christmas, like,
I want to know about it.
I understand why you're having feelings about that. Will you tell me about it?
Yeah,
that sounds like it was really uncomfortable.
You should be a pastor.
It's like I practiced for a while or something.
You should get a PhD. You're so smart. That is going to be a special episode. I can tell you right now. When you finish, we are going to have a party. I don't know if you're going to go to. I'm not even going to name your school, but it's going to be that might be a special episode. I'm like, because that's going to be. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I know you can wait. I know you're more excited than I am, but I share in your excitement.
It's coming.
I think the part about like shared values to the next kind of thing I thought was really a helpful way to kind of get into that deeper part. So I don't know if you can say something about what shared values might you bring up with respect to the Christmas story and saying Merry Christmas.
Yeah. So if someone's saying it's okay, you've gotten through the initial question and you don't want to let it go, right? Well, no, I haven't had an experience, which somebody told me that, but people are getting fired for it or something. It's so easy to want to stay on the facts, right? It's so easy to want to just combat the misinformation. But to turn it and to try and drive deeper, you might say, well, I celebrate Christmas and I enjoy saying Merry Christmas to people that I know celebrate Christmas. I know that we both enjoy doing that and that the season is great. I believe that Jesus is an important figure for us to celebrate. Like, but why do you, and then you turn back to another question, right? Well, trying to avoid red flags. Like, but why do you think it's important that you can say Merry Christmas at the post office? That's not church. We don't assume those folks are worshiping Jesus, even though you and I do. We both worship Jesus. Like, why is it important to you that you can say, or somebody says Merry Christmas to you in a setting that's not Christian? That's going to then drive a deeper question, right? So you're just continually dropping the little shared values, maybe even the little shibboleths. Like maybe you even say like, well, we both agree that Jesus is the reason for the season. Absolutely. Why do I need to say that at the public school where some of the kids are Muslim and some of the kids are Jewish and some of the kids don't practice any religion at all?
And then if they say, because this is a Christian nation and we're all supposed to be Christian because we're making America great again.
Well, then they have stepped out of red flag. They say we're all supposed to be Christian. I have not had that. I've not had this conversation around Merry Christmas, but I've had people feel like they can't say anything. And that's why I love the feelings part, because I think that's really what it is, Blair. They feel like they can't say something about women, especially. Now I'm talking about the men, and now both of you can roll your eyes because it's so classic male being like, you can't make a joke
you can't
about
compliment anyone in the office anymore.
and I'm just like, you cannot be sexist in public and not have somebody call you out. Yes, you cannot. Try not to be sexist. That's what's in my head. So I'm trying to be like,
maybe they should learn to take a compliment.
Yeah, yeah. And it's the same kind of framework where for a lot of these men, it's their own feelings of their inability to know how to talk to a woman in a way that actually allows the woman to be seen and for them to be seen. And I think, Blair, what you're getting at the shibboleth part is how ultimately everybody wants to feel seen and heard. That I think is at the key of this. So like, how can I engage you in a way where I affirm? What can we agree on that kind of affirm so you feel seen and heard? So that gives me permission to then get to invite you to ask a deeper question. Because if people don't feel seen, heard, and valued, they're not going to do the inner work for you because they're going to think you're trying to set them up, right? Rather than engaging in a genuine good faith conversation. And I think that's critical. And I know some of the red flags you listed that we have to avoid would be like, oh, Jesus was an immigrant, Jesus was a refugee, like, and those are true. Those are true. We know the truth. Like literally, it's in the Bible, true, right? But it's not helpful because those terms right now have been politicized with respect to immigrant and immigration, even though unless you're an indigenous person, your family was an immigrant. Like your family immigrated.
Well,
so
didn't.
or captured. Right? So
take that back. How dare you?
Half of my family immigrated, half were captured. You're right. Unless you're like they immigrated or they were stolen, like literally jacked, like and brought
trafficked.
Here. Human trafficking, one might say. And so I think even though these things are true, we know the way in which they've been politicized, like the nativity scenes that we've been seeing, which I absolutely love, where they got like baby Jesus like in zip ties or that are clearly framed around ice. Like I think it causes people to really wrestle with this part of the tradition where Jesus and Mary and Joseph are outcasts within a framework of the political structure we have today. So we have to avoid talking about that, basically. Don't talk about any of that stuff. But that doesn't mean you don't know it's true. It means you have to set it aside, right? So that you can maybe come back to it later or not, because that's not the point. The point really is to get them to go deeper, to perhaps move towards something like a conversion, if you will. And so again, absolutely love that. But the last thing I wanted to say, I guess, as a kind of a way, and if there's anything else, Julie, I want to say to wrap up, I want to get a little bit into the part of Julie you had mentioned earlier around like feelings and needs, and where I've seen the most transformation take place with respect to when I'm able to get to people's feelings is I'm able to see them that we actually need something similar and that we actually have a common enemy. And usually it's like billionaires. It's like what does Bell Hooks call it? Like white hetero patriarchy, like supremacy, right? It's a way in which all these things actually deny us a capacity to be human and try to help us get to that place where we see it. Where I've seen this in environmental justice, particularly with farmers, is like I said, corporations. Like that's where I've been able to make the biggest headway with white Southern farmers who historically have been the people who have been most resistant to a lot of the work that I have been doing, to be supporting the kind of work that I'm doing within that movement. Like I'm literally giving a talk tomorrow for the Good Food Institute. Like the lady was texting me right now. They're more on board because now they see, oh, it's just been this consistent consolidation of capital. And that's really intensified under Trump. Trump has intensified the billionaire capitalist grip on the country. Now I know that was gonna happen. Julia, you making a face like obviously
that was always the intention. That's the point.
That was that. Now I know, but they got hoodwinked. So that is like one of the things that I think is really important. I know, Blair, there's some other aspects of what can get us, what can be one of the things that can prevent us, one might say, of actually getting to, or maybe the feeling that might be actually driving so many things that we have to kind of help people tend to and unpack.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to the conversation we were having about fear is this driving emotion, because I think even the comment of you can't even say Merry Christmas anymore, the root emotion that's happening there is a fear. It's a fear of one's own practice, religious practice, being subverted or taken away. And that is only necessary in a religiously pluralist negative society, such that you're seeking a society where no one is allowed to practice religion in the common. Whereas in America, we practice a religiously pluralist positive experience where we understand and try to celebrate the diversity of religious experience in the common. And it's very unlikely in the American setting that you're never going to be allowed to practice your religious belief. In fact, it's in our Constitution that like the state will not dictate religion, and that is to protect the church. And it's and the state, but that's a whole other podcast for a whole other day. But driving that deeply is, I feel like I can't practice my religious faith in public anymore. And is that really true? Like, and what about that is scary to you, to feel like you can't practice your religion in public anymore? And what has made you feel that way? What experiences have you had? And that's really going to get into then, okay, but my need is to feel safe. My need is to feel relevant. My need is to have freedom of choice. Like, it's going to drive you deeper and deeper into where you can combat what is a real threat and what is an imagined threat.
Julia, I want to give you a second because I see you composing your comment, but what I want to in your head, the thing that Blair, I think you're getting to, or that comes up particularly with around Christianity, is people's inability to understand that our country has gotten more diverse, so there is a more plurality of religions, traditions, and we can't live in a way that is what I've been calling Christian supremacy, meaning an imposition of Christian norms on other people. That that is what
Absolutely.
people, I think, these people are often arguing for. What we would have called, what do they call that with Islam? Sharia law. They're arguing for a Christian version of that.
They want a theocracy.
They want and that's not actually what most of us want. Most people actually don't want a theocracy. They have been like maybe hoodwinked into believing that's actually what they want, but they really don't, like because then it's a very narrow, even type of Christianity that even gets to count as being Christian. This is why we had all the religious wars in Europe, prior to 1700. But anyway, not to get into it. The rest is history pod, which is the other one of my favorite podcasts. But I think it's recognizing that we have to have boundaries and take other people's feelings seriously. And for some people, that feels like a loss. That now you have to actually acknowledge that there are other people who practice other religious traditions, and that you need to maybe say, "Oh, I can't just say Merry Christmas to someone who isn't Christian," or they might. But even I think I've said I say Happy Holidays and Merry Christmas to people that I know are Jewish that go to my son's school. No one's ever said, "I'm Muslim" or "I'm Jewish." You can't say that to me. Like no one's literally ever said that to me. And so that's the point where I'm just like, you can tell it's made up, in terms of people wanting to have something they feel like they can be a victim for, as we talked about last week.
It's what we do. Yeah, like this manufactured these people really want to be oppressed. I think it's two things though. It's not just that the country's become more diverse, it's become more secular. So
Yeah, that too.
like people are less religious, like across the board. And I also feel like part of the reason that there's so much mistrust around Christianity specifically is because of Christian nationalism. And I feel like we, not just us here in this podcast room, but we as a church, not just the Methodist Church, but as a church, generally speaking, at some point are going to have to address the harms, because the reason people are skittish is because of the oppression
Yeah.
The bad things.
And I think, my friend Kate Common in her book Undoing Conquest is trying to do that, putting that into liturgical calendar. The liturgical calendar is the calendar with which Protestant clergy organize their preaching. So as I even said that, and so they are hoping that it would be October would be the time where we can go over we can intentionally spend 4 weeks every year to try to begin to repair the harms of colonialism. There's actually a influencer. I think he's actually, I've seen him on the news, so maybe even more than influencer now. I don't know. That has been talking about Christianity from that perspective, and it might be good for us to have someone on our podcast that is secular, but trying to talk about the tension I think that people have with trusting even progressive Christians.
Well, but I'm just talking about like even right now, like the thing that people are afraid of. Like I feel like the thing that people have attached to in Christian nationalism is the white supremacist part. And like that the fear is less about like their faith and their religion and more about their whiteness. And like it's easier to code it and say that it's about their religion, but that's not what they're talking about. And I know that that's where it's not about the truth and it's not about facts because those is
But
about their
even
feelings, but like
even
their feelings are racism. And I like, what do you,
yes, their feelings are racist, and I would say, or one might say, at least racialized. But it's really about a feeling of they want to feel, like I said, seen and heard, and that they're not going to be able to lose their perception of power, right? And you're right, it is wrapped up in those things, and I think part of the framing of the media does a poor job of talking about why working class whites vote for Trump is they try to say, well, Trump appeals to working class principles. Well, that's not true because the majority of working
black people
class,
are working?
exactly. The majority of working class is always people of color always occupy so many of these spaces. So I'm like, well, no, if you actually just thought critically about what you just
Oh,
said,
no.
you realize that's it, all of a sudden, like, are black people, like people of color, are we dumb? Like we too,
No,
that's
we
basically
just
what you're
don't
saying.
count as real
Yeah.
Americans.
Well,
I
I
don't know
mean,
if you've
within their
noticed.
framework, they're basically saying that, like, somehow we're not able to understand Trump's persuasive argument for working class values if you want to take their argument seriously. And I think this is
No,
the
they're trying
weakness.
to discount this swath of the population so that it can fit the narrative. They're just saying, well, not these people, because this is what they think. And they can't just be like, well, that's what do they call it? Economic anxiety?
This is
A
we are
different
getting
podcast.
a
We've
little bit
jumped the
different podcast, a
shark.
little different podcast. But again, I do think it's helpful in as much as I think when you're getting to the realm of having this conversation around different feelings, like how do we give people the space to feel seen and heard without moving into a space of dehumanizing ourselves, right? And making sure we do a good job of tending to that and staying in that line, which is tricky. And so my family, whenever I know we're having an argument about something that we can't, I try to always pivot to talk about the thing that I know we can talk about. Like sports for my family is a big thing, and that is kind of the gel, that holds. And for my family, a lot of us, I have nephews that play high level college football. I have other cousins that played professional baseball, and so like sports is a thing that we can turn to. Movies are the thing. Like we try to find things that we can turn to. I do when it gets heated. Blair, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say as we move to wrapping up about what you, because that's like my other thing. I'm like, all right,
Well,
well,
just yeah,
let's
you
change this
can't
side. Let's
stay
change the
in
subject. Yeah,
conversations around feelings and needs without it turning into a group therapy session. So it's
yeah.
like maybe there's an opening for these conversations in like 10% of the time you're going to spend with your family. It's okay to just go back to level of cliche.
Yep.
Because the returning up to that level of cliche and like talking about like facts of your own life, what's going on in your own life, right? Like that helps build the hospitality, the trust that you're not just going to be like emotionally drilling people the whole time you're home with them. So you don't have to stay deep in the weeds of conversation. But if you want to probe down there, this is one way you can do it. It's also okay to come back out, and in fact necessary to have light, cliche, common conversation for the bulk of our time together.
And the best way to extricate yourself from those situations is to say, Oh, okay. That's so interesting. I never thought about it that way. And then keep it pushing.
And keep going. I usually just say, "Hey, I'm gonna go get something else to drink. Do you want to?"
He leaves the party.
Mine is always nobody knows how many times you have to go to the bathroom.
Exactly.
So like if you,
yeah.
no, I'm so sorry. I need to stop you because I just need to run to the restroom.
Yep. Or I gotta say, "Oh, Isaiah," like I know he's doing. Like you gotta find your thing. You gotta
I
find your
know
thing.
he's doing something.
Because he is. I'm like, you know what I'm saying? I'm like, I know my son, so I'm like, he is. There. You got to find your things to be able to get away. We want to, and again, as we said last week, we want to start by making sure we're ending with some good news, because there's so many things happening in the world that we
That are
know
awful.
aren't great. So we're gonna end with good news, and the good news for this week is the BBC has an article that we put in the show notes. Basically, it says the Historical Preservation Society has sued the Donald Trump and the White House, basically sued the administration to get them to stop the construction of the East Wing, because basically it's illegal. Like it's supposed to have congressional oversight. All these things are supposed to be approved through all the permits, and they haven't done any of that. And this feels like, from everything I'm reading, one lawsuit that might actually stick. And it's tricky because there's been lots of lawsuits. Like even they voted to release the Epstein files. That ain't happened yet. Like, so there's things that's like, there is this slide to authoritarianism. That is another podcast that we can't talk about. So this good news might be maybe they can actually stop him from building what we know is going to be an epic disaster of a ballroom on the East Wing of the White House. Well, we want to thank you all for joining us for the Progressive Christian Podcast. The Progressive Christian Podcast is a ministry of the Loft, a worship community of West Wheat Methodist Church. If you'd like to connect with us and be a part of the conversation, you can find us on all social media platforms at The Progressive Christians. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you at The Progressive Christians at theloftla.org. Our show is produced by our amazing producer, Spencer, and it is mixed and edited by our wonderful audio engineer, AJ. Again, we want to invite you to please rate, review, share, subscribe to us. If you think someone else could listen to this podcast and benefit from it, please send it to them. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see y'all next time. Bye.
Bye.
Merry Christmas.